July 1st, 1863 started like most mornings, with Barbara hollering at me about something. "John Burns, what in tarnation are you doing with that musket? You ain't no soldier no more," she screeched from the kitchen. I ignored her, rummaging through the closet for my old War of 1812 coat. It smelled like mothballs and bad decisions, but it'd do just fine. "Where are you going?" she demanded, storming into the room with her hands on her hips like some general giving orders. "To see what's going on," I grunted, shoving my powder horn into my pocket. "What's going on is a damn war out there," she snapped. "You'll get yourself killed, and for what? To prove you ain't as old as you look? Better to die out there than sit here listening to your nagging," I muttered under my breath. "What was that?" "Nothing, woman," I barked back. "Now quit your squawking. I'm going, and that's the end of it." She followed me to the door, still yammering. "You're a fool, John Burns. A damn fool. Don't come crawling back to me when you're shot full of holes." I slammed the door behind me and stepped into the street, where a few neighbors were standing around like chickens in a storm. Joseph Broadhead, that one-eyed loafer, was among them. He looked about as useful as a broken plow. "Broadhead," I hollered, "why ain't you armed? The rebels are coming, and you're standing here like a stump." He turned his head slow-like and said, "Ain't none of my business." "Ain't none of your business?" I bellowed. "You coward, you gonna let the rebels take your chickens and burn your barn while you hide under your bed?" Miss Mary Slentz poked her head out of her house next door and gave me a glare sharp enough to cut wood. "Mr. Burns," she said, "leave Mr. Broadhead alone, and you ought to stay home yourself. You're too old for this foolishness." "Too old?" I shot back. "Miss Slentz, if everyone thought like you and Broadhead here, we'd all be flying rebel flags by sundown." She huffed and slammed her door, leaving me to march off toward the sound of musket fire echoing from McPherson Ridge. The streets were quiet as I passed through town, too quiet. Most folks had either run off or holed up in their cellars. Cowards, the lot of them. Didn't they know this was their fight too? Hell, if I could grab my musket and head out there at my age, what excuse did they have? As I neared the edge of town, I spotted a group of Union soldiers moving toward the ridge. They looked young, barely old enough to shave, but they carried themselves with purpose. I hurried to catch up with them, waving my musket above my head. "Hold up there," I called out. A few of them turned to look at me like I'd just fallen off a wagon. One of them, a lieutenant by his stripes, stepped forward and asked, "Who are you?" "John Burns," I said proudly, "veteran of Lundy's Lane and former constable of Gettysburg." He looked me up and down, taking in my ill-fitting coat and ancient musket. "Lundy's Lane? That was, what, 50 years ago?" "49, I corrected him sharply. He smirked and shook his head. "And what do you think you're going to do with that antique?" "Shoot rebels," I replied flatly. The soldiers chuckled amongst themselves, but the lieutenant waved them quiet. "All right then," he said. "If you're so hell-bent on fighting, follow us, but don't get in our way." "I don't need no babysitting," I snapped. They handed me a proper rifle, a Springfield, and some ammunition before sending me toward McPherson Woods with instructions on how to load it proper-like. As if I didn't know how to load a rifle. Kids these days thought they knew everything. The sound of gunfire grew louder as we approached the woods, and my heart started pounding. Not from fear, hell no, but from excitement. It had been years since I felt this alive. As we reached the edge of the woods, the lieutenant turned to me one last time and said, "Stay low and don't do anything stupid." "Don't worry about me," I replied with a grin. "Worry about yourselves." And with that, we plunged into the fray. McPherson Woods was a damn mess. Smoke hung thick in the air, the kind that stung your eyes and made your lungs burn. Bullets whizzed past like angry hornets, and the shouts of men, half of them orders, the other half curses, echoed through the trees. It was chaos, pure and simple. But I'd seen chaos before. This wasn't my first fight, and by God, it wouldn't be my last. I crouched behind a tree, squinting through the smoke to get a good look at the enemy. The young soldiers around me were firing like madmen, barely taking aim before letting loose. "Hold your fire, you damn fools," I barked. "You're shooting at nothing. Save your powder for something worth hitting." One of them, a freckle-faced boy who looked like he should still be chasing frogs, gave me a sideways glance and muttered, "Who put Grandpa in charge?" "I heard that," I snapped. "And if you don't start shooting straight, I'll tan your hide myself." The boy shut up quick after that. I turned my attention back to the battle and spotted a Confederate officer on horseback, riding up and down their line like he thought he was invincible. He was barking orders, waving his saber around like some damn fool in a parade. Well, I figured it was high time someone taught him a lesson. I raised my rifle, taking careful aim. My hands were steady as a rock. Years of cobbling boots had kept them strong, and I held my breath as I squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against my shoulder, and the officer toppled from his horse like a sack of flour. "Got him!" I shouted triumphantly. The soldiers around me turned to look, their faces split between surprise and admiration. "Hell of a shot," one of them said. "Damn right it was," I replied with a grin. "Now quit gawking and keep fighting. There's plenty more where that came from." The lieutenant from earlier appeared beside me, his face grim. "Nice shot," he admitted grudgingly. "But we're getting flanked on the left. We need to fall back." "Fall back?" I repeated incredulously. "We've got these rebels right where we want them." "Sir," he said firmly, "we're outnumbered." "Hell," I muttered under my breath but followed him anyway. No sense arguing with someone who didn't have the sense God gave a goose. We pulled back toward the left flank, where another group of Union boys, the 24th Michigan Infantry, was trying to hold their ground against an onslaught of graycoats. They looked worse for wear, their line barely holding. "Looks like they could use some help," I muttered to myself and headed in their direction. I took up position behind another tree and started picking off rebels one by one. My aim wasn't as sharp as it used to be. Age will do that to a man, but I hit more than I missed. Each shot felt like a small victory, a reminder that John Burns still had some fight left in him. Then it happened, a sharp pain in my arm that made me drop my rifle. A bullet had torn through my sleeve, leaving a bloody gash behind. "Damn it," I cursed, clutching my arm as I ducked behind the tree for cover. Before I could catch my breath, another shot slammed into my leg, knocking me flat on my back. The pain was white hot, like someone had driven a red-hot poker through my flesh. For a moment, all I could do was lie there staring up at the sky, wondering if this was how it ended. But John Burns wasn't about to go out like some helpless old man. "No, sir." I crawled toward an apple tree nearby and did what any sensible man would do. I buried my rifle under its roots with my pocket knife. If the rebels found me unarmed, they'd think I was just some poor civilian caught in the crossfire. Sure enough, not long after that, a group of Confederate soldiers stumbled upon me lying there like a wounded dog. One of them, a wiry fellow with a scraggly beard, looked down at me and said, "What are you doing out here, old man?" "Looking for help," I groaned, clutching my leg for effect. "My wife's sick, needs a doctor." They exchanged glances but didn't press me further. One of them even bandaged my wounds before they moved on. Proof that not all rebels were heartless bastards. Once they were gone, I started crawling back toward town on hands and knees. Every inch felt like a mile, and by the time I reached a small brick house near the edge of Gettysburg, I was ready to collapse. Henry Dustman found me there lying on someone's cellar door like yesterday's laundry. "John Burns?" he said in disbelief. "What in God's name are you doing here?" "I got shot," I said matter-of-factly, showing him my wounds. "Go tell Barbara to fetch me with a wagon." He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Probably figured it wasn't worth wasting time arguing with John Burns. When Henry returned with Barbara some time later, she didn't look too pleased to see me, or too worried either. She climbed down from the wagon with her arms crossed over her chest and said flatly, "I told you this would happen." "Well," I grunted as Henry helped load me into the wagon. "You can say I told you so all you want, but at least I did something." What'd Broadhead do? Hide under his bed? She rolled her eyes but didn't answer, not that she needed to. Her silence said plenty. As we rattled down the road toward home, every bump sending fresh waves of pain through my leg, I couldn't help but smile despite myself. Sure, I was battered and bruised, and Barbara would probably never let me hear the end of it, but none of that mattered. I'd gone out there and fought for Gettysburg when no one else would. And if that made me an old fool, well, so be it.